Rosemary Henderson was standing in her underwear admiring herself. She looked good for her age, she thought, running a hand over her flat stomach. Not bad for nearly 40.
Yes?
The man on the other end of the phone looked decidedly the worse for wear. Unshaven, scruffy, a haunted look in his eyes.
Don't go tonight. I beg you, Rosemary, please. Don't go.
You're drinking again.
Don't go, Rosemary. I'll come home. Please.
The line went dead, and his hand shook as he replaced the receiver. Rosemary pulled on her toweling wrap. Then a worrying thought struck her. She rushed to the airing cupboard and pulled a shoebox out of the back. To her consternation, it was empty. In the forester's office, her husband George took a long swig from a whiskey bottle and pressed the play button on a tape recorder.
Hello, Rosemary. It's me again, you selfish, scheming, thankless bitch. If you think you can just back out of things when you like, you better realize you've got another thing coming. Because it could be that I've got some idea about what I like, too. You seem to think it's drop everything now between us except your knickers.
That evening, Rosemary came out of the house and got into her car. In his cabin, George was making plans to go out too. He undid the chain and took out one of the shotguns, picked up a handful of cartridges, and went out to his green Land Rover. As he drove along, he listened to the tape again, crying.
You've got it wrong, you know, Rosemary. And it won't just be my word against yours. I have the photographs. Your husband would be very interested in one or two of them. Certainly one of them. I mean it, Rosemary. Be there.
In the Royal Oak bar, the clientele that Rosemary Henderson sat alone, looking very smart in a black dress. She took gulps from a short glass, staring pensively into space. The barman gave her a strange look. Attractive women didn't usually drink alone. She finished her glass. The Land Rover had stopped on a bridge. George took the tape out of the machine and got out, went up to the edge, and hurled the tape as far as he could into the water. When it had disappeared, he slumped forward on the parapet, his head in his hands. That evening, it was the police station's annual dance. Chief Inspector Morse stood at the side of the dance floor with Inspector Cyril Dewar, watching their more adventurous colleagues doing the rumba. They included the pathologist Dr. Russell, resplendent in pink and black satin.
How do you manage to look like that when you've been up to your elbows in dead guts all day? I mean our lady pathologist, Morse. Mind you, she scares the pants off me, especially when I remember what she happens.
Morse did his best to ignore him.
Thank you. Well, flat-foots or not, here's your chance. As the band takes you into a quick-step medley and a good old-fashioned ladies request and excuse me.
Hang on. Maybe I'm brave enough thought.
I didn't know they had ladies' requests anymore. Good evening, Chief Inspector.
Good evening, Dr. Russell.
We were just saying you look very, off-duty tonight.
I hope off-duty is a compliment.
You brought a friend.
A colleague from the hospital took pity on me. You shall go to the ball, he said.
She took Morse's pint from him and put it down.
Let's dance, Inspector. Morse.
Surprised?
Well, it's fine the music of pain. Where did you learn?
Here, Oxford, college hops.
Of course. You're such, educated, Jet.
Listen, I ought to explain. Technically, I'm on duty tonight, or I might have been more,
More what?
more organized with invitations.
Just then, he spotted Detective Sergeant Lewis.
What's wrong?
Sometimes I think my sergeant hates to see me enjoying myself.
Are you? Enjoying yourself?
It's a murder scene.
Morse reluctantly left the dance, and Lewis filled him in as they drove to the murder scene.
Report came in 20 minutes ago, sir. Some bloke phoned to say it would interest the police to go to Bay 5B of the Westgate car park. Take a look in the BMW there. That's all.
I hope it's been verified. I wouldn't want my night out ruined by a hoax.
Yeah, it's been confirmed already, sir.
Shame.
You seem to be having a good time.
I've been rescued from Cyril Dewar.
The BMW in Bay 5B of the Westgate car park had had its back window smashed. In the driver's seat, a dead man was slumped sideways over the gear stick. As Morse was inspecting the body, a silver Golf drew up and Dr. Russell got out, still in her ball gown.
Any blood, Inspector?
No.
Good. This dress cost a fortune. I'd have had to step out of it.
Why would a car thief ring the police? He'd get the hell out, wouldn't he? He's looking for a handbag. He finds a corpse.
Well, you see, you have to know the criminal mind. Now, the mind of the car thief has its peculiarities.
This is Mr. War, sir, car park superintendent.
I'd be grateful if you'd give Sergeant Lewis an account of parking procedures here, Mr. War.
Always delighted to help the authorities.
This is something the computer threw up, sir.
Lewis gave Morse a printout and took the eager Mr. War away. Back at home, Rosemary Henderson was rubbing oil into her neck and shoulders. She picked up the phone and dialed. But there was no answer. She studied her reflection in the mirror, examining her throat for lines, and applied a little oil with careful upward strokes. In the car park, Morse rejoined Dr. Russell as she examined the contents of the dead man's briefcase.
The car's registered in the name of Michael Gifford, 12 Riverside Reach.
That's the name on the credit cards, and there's a signed ID picture in there. What is he? 32, 33?
Born 11th of December 1955. What else have we got?
Portfolio of architect's drawings, a copy of the RIBA journal, yellow duster, wash leather, all in the bag.
Glove compartment?
Locked.
Okay if we move the body, Inspector. Just give me a second.
Morse bent down to look inside the car again and noticed something lying on the floor.
Parking ticket. Received tonight, 12 minutes past 7.
That figures. He's been dead 4 or 5 hours. Say between then and 8 o'clock. Oh, and strangling's official. With a piece of new white cord. The sort used for hanging pictures, nothing remarkable. And nothing much in the pockets either. House keys on a ring, loose change, and the wallet.
Car keys?
None. And none in the ignition.
Yes, I noticed that. Peculiar. Why would the killer take the keys and leave the car?
You didn't bring your friend.
Why would I? He's a pediatrician, not interested in corpses.
Sorry, it's just something to say. I'd like to think that we could finish that dance sometime.
So would I.
Lewis walked up and picked up the man's belongings.
Not a bad haul. Bit more to go.
The computer says he was divorced, lived alone. Still, there could be somebody waiting up. I think there should be a visit.
You or me, sir?
Half an hour later, Lewis found himself driving up to Michael Gifford's house in a leafy part of Abingdon. It looked empty, but he went and knocked on the French windows to make sure. As there was no answer, he took the keys from a plastic bag and let himself in.
Hello? Hello, anybody home?
Lewis switched on the lights. The interior was stark and expensive. Everything in the same minimalist style.
Hello?
He looked around and realized that things weren't quite right. A window was open, furniture upturned. He walked towards the window, unaware of the dark-clad figure that slipped out of the shadows behind him, until the man brought his weapon down on Lewis's head. The attacker ran out and got into what looked to Lewis like a Land Rover, and then drove away. Morse, meanwhile, was lying on his sofa with a glass of whiskey, listening to music. He took a thoughtful swig, reached for an envelope that contained 2 tickets, and looked at them for the 100th time. The next day, Morse paid a visit to Lewis in hospital.
How are you feeling now, Lewis?
Oh, a bit groggy, but not bad. I really appreciate you coming down to the hospital.
Well, it saves time, doesn't it? You get the okay, we can press on with the job. Anyway, you're a bit of a record breaker now. 2 cracked heads in how many weeks?
Yeah, all right.
You must have a skull like an anvil.
I wasn't on the same spot. The first knock was here. Last night was there.
And you saw some sort of a van driving off?
Yeah, some sort of van. Could have been.
Could have been.
Well, I was passing out at the time, sir. Did the burglar get anything?
No. There were plenty of valuables around, not touched. Maybe you disturbed him before he got going. Unless he was looking for something specific.
Morse paced up and down outside, waiting for Lewis, when he happened to see Dr. Russell and her pediatrician friend laughing in the corridor. He was helping her on with her lab coat. Morse looked disconsolate.
That's it. Okay. Doc says I've got high-quality bone.
I told you.
like an anvil. Gifford was an architect, successful, expanding practice in Abingdon.
There was a lot of design around that house.
Yes. A bit self-conscious, I thought, like his car.
What about the car? The stuff in it?
2 videos in the glove compartment, pornographic.
Yeah? I hope we're not in for a lot of that.
And a diary. I'm going for this first. And the parking ticket.
Later that morning, George Henderson was sitting on his bunk in the cabin when Mick, his colleague, came in.
Morning, George. You just up? Had an half a shift at the clearing. Busy night?
Didn't log much.
I was trying to track that new vixen down at the cops.
He picked up the local paper and read the headline, "Murder in City Car Park." Meanwhile, Morse bought a drink in the King's Arms and joined Lewis by the window.
What do you think?
Well, it's all there, sir, isn't it? I mean, yesterday's date, 7:15 p.m, Westgate Car Park. Said 7:12 on the parking ticket. He was meeting someone.
And today's date?
Nothing. Well, just a circle around the number. Something's supposed to be happening, perhaps?
Did you go back a bit? Last June, July?
Yeah, there's more. 6:20, 7 p.m, 7:15, all Westgate Car Park.
No entries in August.
Right.
When did you switch to that stuff, Lewis? Mineral water. You developing yuppie aspirations?
Can't have a yuppie policeman, can he? No, the doctor gave us painkillers.
I hope they don't dull your wits. Go to the front. The notes bit. Look at the phone numbers.
Nothing special. Doctor, dentist, garage, AA. One here with no identification. One that just says Camilla. Is that what it says?
That's what I read. Camilla in brackets and a circle round today's date. It's not bad, this. It's not up to their barley mow special, but...
Did you find out about that number, sir?
Belongs to the Cotswold Insurance Company, North Oxford branch.
Figures. Have your insurer's number in your diary?
It would figure if he'd had a policy with them.
Didn't he?
They told me on the phone they'd never heard of him.
Well, he could have been thinking about, I don't know, changing to the Cotswold.
In which case, he'd have put the name, wouldn't he? Still, first things first. Gifford's work set up. You take the office, I'll try and talk to his partner. You will be all right on your own, won't you, Les?
Morse abandoned him and went to a building site to meet Gifford's partner, Brian Pierce.
I'm not a partner. Actually, I'm an associate. I was negotiating for a partnership.
Were the negotiations going well, sir?
It's common knowledge that Michael liked to run his own ship.
Did you and Mr. Gifford see each other socially?
No, we kept our dealings strictly professional.
So you don't know what went on in his private life?
Well, he hinted occasionally. Liked to. Women, good times. Sounded rather hollow to me.
Hollow?
Well, after the divorce.
His wife left him?
Yeah, she ran away to the States with a photographer a couple of years ago. Not a very good photographer.
What are you saying, sir? He was devastated?
Stupefied would be more accurate. He'd have been happier if it had been David Bailey.
You didn't like him?
I didn't have to. I admired him. His vision, energy. He sold the company as a group of discriminating specialists. Nothing too large in terms of work, but always stimulating. I'm a restoration man myself. It's not my field, the modern stuff, obviously. It's very much Michael's thing.
So he'll be hard to replace?
The underlings can't replace the boss exactly, can they? And I have no authority, not being a partner, as I said.
Lewis, meanwhile, drove to Michael Gifford's office. a modern glass building set back off the road. As he got out of the car, he noticed a girl in denim jacket and skirt staring out of the window at him. But when he caught her eye, she turned and fled. The manageress, Mrs. Cameron, showed him round.
Two main projects at the moment are the office block in Worcester Street and the leisure complex at Interlaken.
What was Mr. Gifford like to work for?
Come on, the man's dead. Let's observe the decencies. We're all very sad and shocked. Bring Janice, will you? She's had time enough to compose herself.
Janice?
Oh, our receptionist. She's terribly young. A lot more upset than the rest of us.
Any particular reason why she should be?
Sure, I don't know, Sergeant. What I'd say about Mr. Gifford is he set a standard he expected everyone else to keep to. Well, even yesterday.
Yesterday?
Leaving early. 4 o'clock. He said he'd earned it for working through his lunch.
4 o'clock? Any idea where he was going to?
Driving into Oxford, he said. But Janice saw him last.
Hello, Janice. There's nothing to be frightened of. I just want a word or two. Let's get out in the fresh air, shall we?
Back at the building site, Pierce took Morse into a hut that acted as the site office.
Ice skating, sir?
Yes, I go every Wednesday. It's what my wife and I call statutory recreation. She stays in, looks after the children, and then on Fridays I stay in and she goes to her philosophy lectures.
A popular venue, the ice rink, right opposite the Westgate car park.
Yes, it's appalling to think I was so close.
Well, we'll get all that sorted out, sir. Times and so forth.
I always go to the 7 o'clock session and use the ice rink car park.
Interlaken, you said. Could this be for Mr. Gifford?
A small ingratiation.
I'm sorry, sir?
Postcard to the site foreman. Michael liked to be one of the boys.
It'd be a work trip, though, wouldn't it? Not a holiday.
A bit of both. A little late skiing while he supervised the construction and deepened his suntan.
I'd like to have this, sir.
Certainly, Inspector.
Pierce unpinned the postcard and gave it to Morse.
Thank you. Oh, one last thing, sir. Does the name Camilla mean anything to you?
Outside Gifford's office, Lewis was talking to Janice.
Okay, now, so you'd fetch him his tea around 3:30. And what happened then?
He sometimes said things. He liked, I don't know, if he could make a fool out of you in front of other people.
Is that what he did yesterday?
He said my tights were all wrong with my shoes. He said the clients got their first impression of the practice from me on the desk. And it was naff.
Anything else?
He said, why bother working my notice? He could soon get someone who wasn't a liability.
No wonder you were leaving. Now listen, I've got to ask you this. Was Mr. Gifford ever anything more to you than just the boss?
It was only, it didn't last long. It was all finished months and months ago.
As Janice broke down, Mrs. Cameron approached.
It was only, nothing.
Oh. Janice, please. We may not even need to bother you again. Nothing's worth getting this upset about, is it? I'll leave it there then, for now.
I'll get someone to take her home straight away.
No. No one's taking me home. I'll go home, I'll get a taxi. No one's taking me.
All right, Janice. It's all right, dear. I've just remembered, Sergeant Lewis, there was a phone call yesterday around 3 o'clock. It could just have been that decided Mr. Gifford to leave early.
Any idea who it was?
No. It was a woman's voice.
Later that day, Lewis met up with Morse at his house. The inspector was putting a tape in his cassette player as Lewis wandered in from the kitchen.
I did it, sir. The name Camilla get any reaction?
No, total blank. Where's the Radio Times?
Excuse me, sir, you got any butter?
Gazing out on the Jungfrau. The Frau not as young as all that, but experiences everything. Booze and high jinks well up to standard. See you 30th. Cheers, MG. Now, what sort of man detaches the Frau from Jungfrau like that, Lewis?
Sort of gets strangled for his jokes, sir?
The sort that shows off about women but doesn't really like them. Touchy, arrogant high flyer, discarded girlfriend in the background.
Yeah. Taking it badly, has little Janice. Seems like he trampled on her.
And a jealous colleague. You managed to find yourself something then?
Oh, yes, sir. Sardine. Well, one sardine and a radish.
Good.
Lewis sat down and looked doubtfully at his sandwich.
This is it. Collector's item.
Camilla, sir. In brackets.
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm seeing her tonight.
Oh, on your own, sir?
Yes. Well, I think we can leave that now, Lewis.
Morse picked up an envelope and found it was empty.
Anything wrong?
I had a couple of tickets for the opera. They seem to have disappeared.
2 tickets?
Yes. They must have... Well, I can look for them later.
Morse left the room and Lewis looked around for somewhere to leave his unwanted snack. Lacking any better ideas, he stuffed it into his pocket and followed Morse out. They paid a visit to the squash courts to meet the manager of Cotswold Insurance. Edward Manley was in the middle of a game, but he came out when Morse pressed his ID card against the glass wall.
Didn't my staff... I left instructions. There's no problem, is there? We did a full database search this morning. Murder guy has no connection with Cotswold Insurance.
Your number was in his diary.
Well, he could have been going to give us a whirl. Well, just as well he didn't. We'll be shelling out now. Big maybe. Maybe. Look, I didn't stick around to see you at the office.
I would have saved us some time. We need to go to the top. You're the manager.
Yeah, well, I just had to get out and unwind. There was a bit of an atmosphere this morning. Anyone tell you?
You tell me, Mr. Manley.
Oh, it wasn't anything, you know, just one of the girls. Women. Bit of promotion's gone to her head, stands on her rights. We had this rush on, you know, looking for your stuff, amongst everything else, and she was whinging about bloody flexi time and this birthday lunch. Can you imagine that she arranged at the Dewdrop? Her and a couple of the others. No, give me blokes any time, I'm afraid. You can ball a bloke out, can't you? You know, get it sorted, buy him a pint, then it's all over. Well, yeah, not with a woman. Well, not Rosemary Henderson, anyway. You know, she got me wound up yesterday. Same thing.
So you unwind at the squash courts?
Yeah, that's it. Bit of marathon running, rowing. Good for the broker's bulge.
Manley walked with them to the exit.
Thank you for talking to us. You will look out for any possible connection. Inform the people who are at the lunch.
Sure, sure. Hey, that's not your Jag, is it? What a beaut. You know, I had my eye on a 2.4 Mark II. Had to settle for an S-type.
Excuse me, Mr. Manley, we've a very busy day ahead.
Well, sorry again. Cheers.
Later that day, the girl from Gifford's office, Janice, got out of a taxi and came into a shop that was being fitted out. She went through to the back, where two painters were working on the stairs.
Hello, we're just knocking off. We've got the first coat on the woodwork, so mind the handrail.
Janice completely ignored him and left a big handprint on the banister.
Bloody hell.
At about the same time, George Henderson was sitting in his Land Rover watching the Dewdrop restaurant. Rosemary's car was parked outside. There was nothing else to be seen. But he kept waiting. Lewis, meanwhile, was supervising the search of Brian Pierce's car outside his house. Pierce himself looked on.
The ticket we're looking for, lads, is something like that. But anything else you see, give us a nod.
Morse was inside talking to Pierce's wife, Fran.
Brian has Wednesdays off. I have Fridays. It's part of the grand plan for keeping the soul alive in the domestic swamp.
Your husband explained. Mr. Pierce believes ice skating is good for his soul, does he?
Mine's the soul of issue. He's pretty well fulfilled by his work. The ice skating is to give his brain a rest.
If he left here at 6:30, he'd have parked around 6:45.
You know, they'll never find a ticket. Honestly, I'm always clearing garbage out of the car. Both cars. Still, it's just a formality, isn't it?
Well, it is a formality.
It's also an inconvenience. Michael, he might seem harsh to say this. He did nothing but inconvenience Brian. Now he's doing it from the grave.
Why didn't Mr. Pierce leave the practice?
Jobs with, I suppose, the Gifford cachet aren't easy to come by. But he was looking round.
Not a thing, sir. No ticket, no receipt.
Will you excuse me, Mrs. Pierce?
They took Pierce into his study to talk, where they were surrounded by his collection of pre-Raphaelite landscapes.
You didn't ever sort of pass the time of day with any of the other skaters, did you, sir?
Well, I may have done. Might be in question.
Romney Marsh, sir?
Oh, yes. A little inch-bowled. Do you like it? So it's unusual for him. It's early. See, Inchbold generally went in for...
Yes, I'm aware of what Inchbold generally went in for.
If you know where to look, the prices are not prohibitive.
They are if you're a policeman. Even if you know where to look.
Morse fingered the white cord that hung the picture and caught Lewis's eye.
I want the ice rink staff questioned about Pierce. I want a check run on his income, anything earned by his wife. Also a discreet watch on all multi-storey car parks tonight.
Right, sir. He doesn't look much like an ice skater, does he? See him in a sequin catsuit.
White cord, Lewis.
DIY store, sell miles of it. I've got to hang it in my shed.
No, it's a question of find the Frau. There's a woman in there somewhere.
Not Mrs. Pierce?
Mrs. Pierce is a house Frau. Bend your mind to the diary again, too, would you? Also think about why someone would have 8 exquisite, genuine, pre-Raphaelite paintings on his wall and 1 dud.
What is it, a dud? A Romney Marsh?
Well, if it's an Inchbold, even an early Inchbold, I'm the next chief constable.
Morse and Lewis got out at the station. Morse went inside to buy a ticket, and Lewis, waiting outside, put his hand in his pocket to discover the sardine and radish sandwich from earlier. Holding it in 2 fingers, he delicately threw it away. In a clearing outside his cabin, George Henderson had built a fire. He was examining a photograph of his wife, Rosemary, with another man. It had been taken from above the naked couple, so that all that could be seen of the man was the back of his head. It was with a letter, a threatening letter signed Michael. George threw them both onto the fire. That evening, a taxi drew up in a very smart London square, and Morse got out, passing a chauffeur-driven Daimler as he went to ring the bell at Camilla's house.
Gifford. I know Michael. Poor Michael. But today's date means nothing.
Camilla led him into the sitting room, which was, like herself, attractive and expensive-looking.
You weren't expecting him.
No. Can I get you a drink?
Thanks. Could I, is that a bottle of Glendewick?
Probably.
Thanks. Most of this goes for export now. Cheers.
Cheers.
How did you meet Gifford?
The usual way.
Sorry, the usual way?
For a prostitute to meet a man. It was in a bar, somewhere suave. I'm very careful. No one ever suspects I'm anything but a straight businesswoman with a line in fashion.
When was that?
February. He was in town on an architects' conference. That was before my appointment book was as busy as it is now, before I could pick and choose.
Really familiar with, we don't see this, not precisely this level of activity in Oxford.
It disturbs you?
No. No.
Yes, Inspector, yes. You can't keep the disapproval out of your voice. A nice girl like me.
In Oxford, Pierce's wife called him from the top of the stairs.
Where are you going, Brian? It's your turn to read the story. You have absolutely nothing to hide.
And why haven't we told them?
There's no point. It's not necessary. No, listen, Brian. Listen!
Back at Camilla's, Morse took off his coat and sat down.
Did you see Gifford on a regular basis?
Not exactly. He was more trouble than he was worth. Some clients are. He liked to monopolize me when he was in town. Whole nights, weekends. I went to Brighton with him. April had to be. Good hotel. Money no object, but I don't know. His ego got in the way. Then he wanted me to go to Switzerland.
Interlaken, in June.
Yes, all expenses paid. He said I was tax deductible.
Did you go?
No, he was starting to get, I don't know, possessive. Some men do about whores. I didn't need that, or him. I'm in this business because I like it and I'm good at it. He was only competent, whatever he liked to think about his performance.
You rejected him. How did he react?
Some men I'll meet halfway. The powerful sort. The sort that, well, there aren't many of them. Who appreciate what I've got to offer. Take the trouble to please me, too.
She refilled Morse's glass.
You didn't answer the question.
In a multi-storey car park in the outskirts of Oxford,
A young man was trying the doors of parked cars. He found one to his liking and, checking there was no one around, thumped the back window with a muffled hammer. Suddenly, hands reached out to grab his arms and 2 policemen dragged him away.
Okay, you stop right there.
So you went quietly?
In the end.
Did he ever mention anything about his background, his wife, the divorce?
Are you married?
That has nothing to do. No, I'm not.
Why?
Morse took a slug of his drink and glanced at the ceiling. She was uncomfortably close and leaning towards him.
Too choosy, too hesitant, too lazy, too busy.
Hesitant?
Yes. Well, sometimes. Isn't everyone?
I'm not.
Look, you know, I find it very hard to believe in your perfectly controlled, perfectly self-contained life.
You're hesitant because you've never found out what you're really capable of. If you did, you'd have the confidence for anything forever after, with any woman.
Somehow she was holding his hand. Morse got up and retreated to a safe distance.
Why did you really stop seeing Gifford?
I told you, he was a nuisance. He was boring.
Oh, come on. Boringness is endemic, isn't it? And you just said. You said that all the interesting ones are few and far between. You cut out all the bores, you'd have no business.
Well, all right. He did get rather unpleasant when I said I wouldn't go to Interlaken.
How unpleasant. Threats?
Not actually. He sent some letters.
What kind of letters? Have you got them?
No.
Why? Were they too horrible to keep?
I wouldn't say. Well, no, not actually. Well, all right. They were pretty terrible. He couldn't take rejection. You whoring, ungrateful cow, that kind of thing.
Anything else?
There was a tape, a cassette tape. Came through the post. Revolting. I got rid of that too. Sorry.
I'd better go.
Stay. Tell me about this woman.
Which woman?
The one you hesitate with. We could explore. Talk. Anyway, it wouldn't. There'd be no obligation.
Her face was inches from his. When the telephone rang, Morse was summoned back to Oxford to interview the car thief who sat with his head in his hands. Morse banged the man's hammer on the desk.
He was dead. He was dead, all right. He was dead when I found him, I swear.
Tell me.
Well, that's it, isn't it? All right, I go for the back window. I stick my hand in. I do the lock. I mean, I'm going for the radio, ain't I? So I get the door open and I find the body. There you go.
So what did you do?
I phoned you, didn't I?
You could have done it. He was asleep under that rug. You disturbed him, panicked, and throttled him.
Did you get my mum?
No, he didn't. He didn't get her. Go on.
What?
Why did you break the back window?
Well, I just told you, didn't I?
There must be easier ways of getting in.
No, not with a BMW, there ain't. I mean, look, even if you drop a wire, there's all these safety catches and stuff on the locks.
Get rid of it.
Eh?
Out, Miles. We've had enough. Do a statement. No, wait.
Where are the keys? Be useful to a fellow like you, BMW keys.
Well, there weren't none. That's a funny thing, there weren't none.
Late that night, Brian Pierce locked the door of his study and unhooked the painting of Romney Marsh and a couple of the others, genuine ones. He wrapped them up in a coat, tucked them under his arm, and left the house. The next morning, Morse paid a visit to Dr. Russell in the lab.
Anything new?
He got better looking when the swelling went down. His daily identified you without too much revulsion. Don't think she liked him.
No one did.
He was suntanned, but not in the usual places.
Well, he'd been late skiing in Interlaken, not lazing on a beach without his clothes.
Do you ever do that?
What?
Time of death between 6:30 and 7:30. Lays on a beach without your clothes.
No. Was he fit?
Extremely. Beautiful muscle tone.
Morse looked at the report.
Handed?
And tremendously strong. Had to be. I mean, if Gifford had put up a fight, he'd been quite an opponent.
Not a woman.
I don't think so. It's possible, but how many women can be this aggressive? It's very rare.
That's right. Thanks.
I sometimes wonder why I'm doing this job. Why I'm not out there, among the living, days like this. Maybe I could do with some lazing on a beach, etc.
It's a tantalizing thought.
Is it?
I sometimes wonder about police work too, but in the end, we both pay the price for job satisfaction. At least you're at the top.
So are you?
I suppose I've settled for something. Actually, I always wondered.
Big load from the infirmary, Doctor. Nasty spleen they want you to look at. Fast, if possible.
Yes, okay. I'll be along in a moment.
I'll call you.
Please do.
In a clearing in Whiteham Woods, where the fire was still smoking, George Henderson loaded a shotgun. He had placed a wooden peg on a stump for target practice. He took a swig of whiskey from the bottle beside him, aimed, and fired. He missed. But as his colleague, Mick, came over the rise, he reloaded and fired again, making no mistakes this time. In the police station, Lewis and a number of other officers were watching a video.
Let's walk, Lewis.
Okay.
Seen enough to say how Gifford liked his porn?
Oh, straight in. Well, more or less. Like these women a bit on the submissive side. Hey, the acting in those things is terrible.
Couldn't take rejection.
Who said that? Camilla?
No one recalled Brian Pierce at the ice rink.
Instructor swore he'd seen him at the Green Cafe regularly, evenings.
You checked?
No corroboration. Quick turnover of stuff there.
And what about his money?
Well, Gifford paid him $20,000 a year. He could make a few thousand extra from jobs on the side. Well, his wife has $1,500 a year for a family trust.
Try buying pre-Raphaelite landscapes and portraits with that. We'll get the fraud squad boys to go over Gifford's accounts.
Oh, Janice. I tried the address and number on her office record. She wasn't there. Hasn't lived there for weeks.
They took a walk in the park, their overcoats turned up against the cold.
How does Pierce fit in with the circle in the diary?
The circle in the diary could relate to anything, couldn't it?
I had a spot to bother getting to sleep last night. I kept going over and over that. So we have this, like, calendar, and Valerie does it. Puts circles around important dates. Kids' dental appointments and sports days and such.
She'd write them in, though, wouldn't she? Just so she'd know why she'd marked them.
Yeah, well, I suppose. But not the really obvious thing.
Such as?
Birthdays in the family.
Right. The birthdays of someone close don't need an explanation. It's just to remember to post the card in time.
I suppose so. Oh, you mean Gifford, maybe?
Yes. Because he knew someone with a birthday yesterday, someone close.
Who?
I don't know about close, but he knew someone with a birthday. Well, think, Lewis.
Manley? In Manley's office?
Correct.
The woman he had a row with?
At the Cotswold Insurance Company.
Yeah, and Gifford had the Cotswold number, but no name next to it.
He didn't need to put a name, it was familiar. Lewis!
How's the head? I thought you'd never ask.
In the centre of Oxford, Pierce's Volvo drew up outside a small art gallery. He took a large parcel wrapped in a coat out of the boot and hurried inside, looking furtively around him. A couple of hours later, the office of the Cotswold Insurance Company was crowded as the staff were gathered together and the police took their statements. Lewis interviewed Manley and his secretary, Amy Morris.
I seem to have inconvenienced you again, Sergeant. But I mean, if you've always kept quiet about something...
If it comes to that, it's a public place.
Not from this office.
Do you think we could take it from the beginning again?
Yes, sure. We're opera buffs, Amy and me. Look, perhaps here I should say that my wife's dead. Amy's divorced. Real gossip fodder. This bomb salt of the earth, but they'd never in a million years believe that we could just be friends.
Manager and secretary.
So you were at the opera on Wednesday night?
We saw De Rosenkavalier.
Could I make the point that Edward, Mr. Manley, turns these occasions into treats for me and my daughter? She's disabled. We don't get many treats.
I think you might find this statement of interest.
Lewis glanced at the piece of paper handed to him.
So, you parked your car in St. Giles here. A little before 6:55 on Wednesday, you went to meet Mrs. Morris and the daughter at the Apollo.
Then we all had a drink in the bar.
You were in your seats when?
7:15.
Wonderful seats, front stalls. I did a copy of the holiday list.
Thanks, Chloe. You wanted to see the staff holiday dates.
He handed the list to Lewis. While Lewis was interviewing at Manley's office, Morse paid a visit to Gifford Associates. Janice was walking towards the office when she saw the police cars in the drive and paused. Morse turned to see the girl hovering in the gateway and then turn and run. Puzzled, he went into the office to join a perturbed Mrs. Cameron.
2 people away at the end of June.
Lewis looked up from the holiday list.
Marion Robbins, Rosemary Henderson.
Is that of any interest?
Which one's the birthday girl, Mr. Manley?
I'm not reading you.
Someone had a birthday yesterday.
That was Rosemary, exercising her rights.
Any idea where she went for her holidays?
I'm not sure. South of France, wasn't it?
Switzerland. Interlaken. Remember? The hotel suite with the superb crystal chandeliers.
I'd like to speak to her now.
Trust Rosemary to be missing when she's wanted.
She's clinching an account today, somewhere in Swindon.
Lewis picked up the phone.
8 right round and 1, 2, 3.
That evening, he and Morse stood outside a gym waiting to talk to Rosemary Henderson. She was attending an aerobics session.
5, 4, 3.
How often does she come here?
In books. Fully paid up. 250 quid a year. She can come whenever she wants for that.
Mostly Wednesdays after wrestling with Gifford at the Westgate.
Oh, and this place closed for structural alterations in August.
No appointments in the diary for August.
Afterwards, Morse talked to Rosemary in the Royal Oak Bar.
How often do you have a stiff drink before your exercise classes?
Not often. Never. Oh, Wednesday was different, I told you.
Tell me again.
I'd had this terrible day. A row at the office. Although that's nothing new. And no one to tell about it when I got home. My husband's very... well, he seems obsessed with the work these days.
You parked at Gloucester Green. They issue stickers there. Did you get one?
I must have done. I don't know where it is.
If you're at Gloucester Green at 6:45, still here at 20 past, and doing back bends at 7:45, there's no way you had time to dodge up to the 5th level of the Westgate. How about before?
Before?
Look, I don't need to tell you, Mrs. Henderson, it would have been better for everyone, including you, if you'd come forward sooner.
How could I come forward? I'm married. Michael and me, it was... well, I suppose you could call it a holiday romance. Isn't that ridiculous at my age?
No. You were telling me you met Gifford for the first time at Interlaken.
Yes. Well, that was what was so... I mean, there we were in the Alps. This hotel and everything. He said his firm was in Abingdon. And I said that... well, the coincidence was...
You were alone?
Yes, my husband hates flying and I needed... well, I just had to get away.
So back here you continued seeing him?
Off and on?
Regularly, surely. Gifford had appointments every Wednesday.
It wouldn't surprise me to learn that he was seeing someone else. No. No, I'd broken it off. I'd been so stupid. And I didn't enjoy deceiving my husband. He's not been well.
Where else did you meet Gifford, apart from the Westgate?
Nowhere. No, there was nowhere. Yes, all he was offering was a few minutes in a parked car in a multi-storey car park. And I took it, just that, until I came to my senses.
When was the last time?
2 weeks ago.
Lewis came over.
The barman says Mrs. Henderson listened to the Archers with him on Wednesday night. She drank a single malt whiskey.
Last thing, did Gifford ever threaten you?
No.
No abusive letters or calls?
No, nothing like that. I told you. Didn't last long.
Oh, would you mind, Mrs. Henderson? I'd like a specimen signature for the record.
Well, of course.
As Rosemary wrote her signature on Morse's notepad, her husband was watching her, unnoticed, from his Land Rover in a corner of the car park.
Will that do?
Thank you. Good night. Specimen signature, eh?
She's left-handed. The killer isn't.
Well, she's in the clear now. If Gifford was still alive to get a car park and taking it 12 minutes past 7.
Yes. Neat, isn't it?
So what do we do, sir? Go for the husband or respect her privacy?
No, leave him out for the moment. I'll look into the background.
You locked the study door. I came back from the school run and you'd gone off with the key. It's been locked all day.
In Pierce's house, Fran turned on her husband.
I've got the Endersley house model in there. It's fragile. I don't want the children messing it about.
For heaven's sake, Brian, you might trust me. A handover. Don't want some of that gold ink for tomorrow. She's got her medieval project.
Not now.
What do you mean? Brian, will you please tell me what's going on?
The next morning, Janice picked up her post from the shop door and took it upstairs. The painters were having a cup of tea.
Oh, there's a parcel for you as well. It was behind the door when we came in. It's too early for the post.
She opened the... It was full of banknotes.
I'm sorry we woke you up, Mrs. Henderson.
At Rosemary's house, policemen were going through her car.
Oh, no, please. I'm glad you're early. George isn't back yet.
Your neighbours will probably be having a lie-in too Saturday morning. Better luck nobody will notice. There you go, Sergeant. Oh, that's it. There are no time at all. Your alibi, Mrs. Henderson.
What?
Gloucester Green Car Park, Wednesday, 28th of September, 6:49 p.m.
Oh, my God, fancy it's being there. I usually just, well, I don't know, screw them up and lose them.
Okay. Off you go then, lads. Thanks. I'll not keep them hanging around, damaging your reputation.
Relieved? I'll bet she is. It's more than Brian Pierce is going to be. Yes, I've got Inspector Grossmith from Fraud with me now. Yes, he's been following the invoice trail, apparently. Very revealing. No. No. We haven't got the address of poor little Janice yet, Lewis. Okay. Yeah, I'll get someone to check with directory inquiries. Bye.
Lewis and Morse met up outside the pathology lab.
So, Pierce was ripping him off. How much?
15, 20,000 a year for the last 5 or 6 years. Very tidy rip-off. He was diverting materials Gifford had paid for into jobs he had going on the side and then collecting from the clients.
I think Gifford would have twigged and sacked him.
Maybe he did twig. Maybe he liked having something over Pierce, something to bargain with. Anyway, Bill Grossmith's still working on it. He thinks Gifford was on a dodge himself. His tax position's questionable.
Pierce has still got to be out number one, hasn't he?
Yes, well, it would be a pity not to check out the Henderson leads that you brought in.
If you say so, sir. And it's always a pleasure to see Dr. Russell.
Lifting a fellow consultant's notes isn't 100% ethical, Inspector.
The proper channels will take more time than I think we've got. So, Henderson is ill.
Extensive liver damage. Irreversible.
Caused by what, booze?
Warnings about alcoholism going back to 1984. Admitted earlier this year with liver failure.
You won't have long then.
6 to 9 months, maybe?
You'd be too weak to strangle a man like Gifford, then.
No, not necessarily.
Anything else? Side effects?
Well, he could be impotent.
How his wife would deal with that.
Well, that's all, thanks. And for coming in on Saturday.
You're welcome. I shop near here anyway on Saturdays.
Morse and Lewis set off again.
And I lunch at the White Horse.
So,
I don't know why we should have agreed to it. I mean, why does Rosemary Henderson deserve special consideration? She didn't come clean with us.
I think we should see Henderson.
Yeah.
But surely, I mean, shouldn't we see Pierce first?
Now, Pierce will keep. We'll go to Whiteham Woods.
At that moment, Pierce was in his study, pressing himself against the wall so that his wife and children wouldn't see him as they got into the car. When they'd driven off, he crossed to the door and locked it, then went over and took one of his paintings, a small portrait, off the wall. He laid it face down on the desk and cut the picture cord off the back with a penknife. It made a length of about 4 feet. Morse and Lewis found Henderson in the woods chopping logs outside his cabin.
I thought, hasn't that job been automated by now, sir?
Of course. There's no gadget that does it this clean.
Is it a duty? You're employed as a warden, I understand.
It's not a duty. It keeps my strength up.
There's been a murder, Mr. Henderson, in the Westgate car park, Wednesday night. You may have read about it. Mr. Michael Gifford. He was known to your wife. Were you aware of that?
No.
We've had reason to ask her to account for her movements.
It's her exercise class Wednesdays. How did she know it?
I think perhaps you should discuss that with her.
As they talked outside, Lewis went through the forester's log on the desk.
Where were you on Wednesday, Mr. Henderson?
What have my movements got to do with it? I didn't know it.
As he left the cabin to rejoin Morse, he noticed one of the guns was missing.
I need information.
I was here. There's a new pair of badgers, I think, seem to be, anyway, establishing themselves in the copse. A new vixen, too. I didn't want to leave them.
Aren't there relief wardens? You don't have to do it all, surely?
I like it here. You can see my notes, my log.
Yes, well, I'm sorry, sir, but unless somebody actually saw you, I mean, you could have written a log at any time. It doesn't count as proof.
Proof? What do you mean, proof?
In Pierce's study, Lewis looked up at the length of white picture cord hanging from the ceiling. Beneath it lay the body of Brian Pierce, a piece of cord still round his neck.
Suicide. He didn't keep after all.
He pulled the sheet back up to cover the dead man's face. Morse turned round and noticed that 3 of the pictures were missing. 2 officers went outside to talk to Pierce's 3 small children, while Morse sat in the kitchen with his wife.
Can't imagine what possessed him. Everything was fine. Really fine. I could believe. I even think it could have been some kind of accident.
I wouldn't go on thinking that if I were you, Mrs. Pierce. There'll be an inquest, of course. You should prepare yourself for some painful revelations.
Painful?
We completed our audit of Mr. Gifford's accounts today.
Oh. So you'll know.
No.
About Brian. About... Well, there'll be discrepancies, I imagine.
There are.
Brian took nothing that wasn't his by rights. He did the work of a partner, so he drew the pay of a partner one way or another. And Michael, well, you didn't know him. He played complicated games.
If Mr. Gifford had found out...
He was in no position himself to throw stones.
Mutual blackmail, it crossed my mind.
I reject blackmail, actually. We had contingency plans. The collection's worth a good deal. The paintings, if we'd sold, we could have repaid everything Brian took from the practice and still have been in profit.
It was a crime, Mrs. Pierce, even if it looked like efficient investment.
Brian he was efficient. We were an efficient unit, together, a family. It was perfect. He had such an eye for quality.
You do know, of course, there are 3 paintings missing.
Fran Pierce looked at Morse. She obviously didn't know.
You know, I can't for the life of me see why we have to complicate it. Gifford was onto him, so he killed Gifford. We were onto him, so he killed himself. I mean, if it had gone to court, it would still have been a nasty bit of public disgrace for Pierce. He wouldn't have been able to handle it. The wife wouldn't either.
If he'd have done it, the efficient Mr. Pierce would have had an alibi. A proper one.
Just because nobody remembers him at the ice rink doesn't mean to say he wasn't there, so.
Doesn't it? An unlikely-looking ice skater like Pierce? No. I want to think, and I want to talk to Henderson again. I'll see you later, Lewis.
Do you want me to call Mrs. Henderson?
Yes, certainly.
In the cabin in the woods, George Henderson was making a phone call.
Hello, George Henderson here. Look, this is, I've got to talk to somebody, and, well, it's about my wife. Yeah. The police have been. She's got something to do with this Westgate murder. I don't know, but I'm really... I'm scared. I couldn't tell them, but I know for a fact that she was in the Westgate car park Wednesday night. I saw her drive in there about 6:30. Look, could we meet? Yes, it perhaps set my mind at rest. No, I can't go home. I'll be here. Yes, in the office. Yeah, that suits me. Yeah, bye.
He put down the receiver and smoothed out the corners of the map that he had been folding in his anxiety. Then he went out to the Land Rover and took out a shotgun. At lunchtime in Oxford, Morse parked outside the White Horse. Inside, Janice was sitting in a corner by herself. Morse walked in and saw Dr. Russell waiting in the bar.
Hello. I thought I might find you here.
I thought you might think you might find me here. In fact, I thought you might think I'd been so blatant that you wouldn't come.
I got held up. The Pierce suicide.
Oh, God, yes. Poor Mr. Pierce. He was being delivered to the mortuary just as I was leaving.
Is there somewhere a bit quieter?
Yes.
Rosemary, too, was on the phone.
Thank you, Sergeant Lewis. My husband? Well, naturally, I understand why you told him, but... Well, you do see my situation. I know, but... Well, nothing's going to come of this. So it could be that a lot of trouble's been taken for... Well, really for nothing. Yes. Well, thank Inspector Morse for me, will you? Bye.
She was very worried. She put down the receiver and picked up a whiskey bottle that was standing on the sideboard.
Don't you eat vegetables?
This is pure food.
As a doctor, I ought to challenge that. But I suppose better ones have tried.
I don't know about better. I enjoyed talking to you.
Then why don't you do more of it?
I don't know. Job gets in the way, maybe. I get in the way. Maybe I'm the job.
The smashing of glass made them look over to where Janice had stood up. In the Hendersons' house, Rosemary poured the contents of the whiskey bottle down the basin and took the empty shoebox out of the airing cupboard. She put both on the bed and then pulled various items of clothing, men's clothing, out of the wardrobe and scattered them on the bed too. Then she picked up the phone.
Get off me! I want another drink!
No, you're not having any more.
I'm not going!
In the White Horse, the bartender was trying to persuade Janice to leave quietly.
Sorry, I really am sorry, but please excuse me. I'll call you.
Dr. Russell stared after him as he followed Janice out into the street.
Janice! Wait!
Meanwhile, Rosemary led Sergeant Lewis upstairs to her bedroom.
It was just after I was speaking to Sergeant Lewis. It was really strange.
I wish you'd told us more about this, Mrs. Anderson, at the interview.
So do I, now.
Let's get it sorted out then, eh?
I thought I'd do a blitz on his dry cleaning. While he's been on the survey, it's just been his old clothes. He comes in and out here while I'm at work.
Why would he do that? Why wouldn't he want to see you?
Well, it's awkward hours. And No, it's because of... I didn't want to say this. It's because he's drinking. He's on a... Well, he has these bouts. He's been all right since he was in hospital, but I think if he found the things, which he obviously did, well, it started him off again.
Wait a minute. There was a tape, you say, and letters from Gifford.
Yes. Horrible. I was going to give them to the police, but I couldn't. I couldn't. It was what Michael said about me. I would have done them in the end. I meant to, that's why I kept them.
They were in this?
Yes, I hid them in the airing cupboard behind the towels. George never goes in there.
We obviously did this time. Took everything out. Was this with the box?
He picked up the empty whiskey bottle.
Yes.
How long could he have known about it?
I have no idea.
Well, when did you last check that the stuff was all in the airing cupboard?
2 weeks, about.
Well, not again, since the murder.
No, I didn't want to know. I was frightened. I still am frightened.
Janice walked rather unsteadily through the shop and pushed past the painters, ignoring them as usual. Morse followed her inside, interrupting the men a second time and brushing against the wet banister with his sleeve. One of the painters swore silently.
That evening, Morse and Lewis drove out to Whiteham Woods.
25,000 quid in a paper bag.
Well, she'd thrown a bit of it around the place.
You reckon that's what Pierce would get for his painting?
2 of them. Romney Marsh wouldn't fetch anything.
Check out the art dealers then? Mrs. Pierce will be clawing the money back in no time.
I think he's been too clever for that.
Huh?
Janice just happened to get an anonymous gift of £25,000 on the day he died, even if it's proved to have come from Pierce. It means that he wanted her and no one else to have it.
What about the dud one? Romney Marsh?
Yes, well, think. Pierce's tidy little ways, when it comes to fraud. He goes out one day to snap up a charming, early inch-bowl landscape with whatever it costs in his pocket.
Okay.
He comes home with a landscape, right sort of date, not an inch bold, but who's to know? He's the one with the eye.
But what's he done with the money?
He'd set Janice up with her own little business, so she wouldn't have to be Gifford's excess baggage anymore. Flat above the shop, where they could go after the Green Cafe, every Wednesday at least.
They'd like fell for each other then?
Well, he fell for her. She kept saying this afternoon he was very kind and nice.
I thought as much. Poor little Janice.
Her grief over Gifford's death would have meant the end for Pierce, on top of everything else. Ah, we have a problem.
A wooden barrier blocked their path.
Should be child's play to you, Lewis.
They stopped just past another car, a blue Jaguar, that had been left at the side of the road. Morse got out to join Lewis as he picked the lock of the barrier.
Looks at Pierce. Gifford gave Janice a mouthful on the day he was killed.
Yes, and he had the power to put Pierce in court any time, yes.
Motives all over the place. So what are we doing here? And why am I shifting this barrier illegally?
Because it's there, Lewis.
Get rid of the dud painting.
Come, Lewis. Who'd want to be caught with a fake in his collection? His wife would never live it down. The man had some decency.
As they drove down a grassy track, a figure in a hooded tracksuit jogged past them, going back the way they had come. A few yards further brought them to the cabin in the woods, with a Land Rover parked outside and a smoking fire.
This is it.
It's what?
This is the van, you know, that drove away from Gifford's the night I got thumped on the head. I noticed this logo on the side when I went down.
You'd have got Gifford's address from the letters.
Morse pushed the cabin door open. Inside, it was empty.
Troublesome? Or is he just getting careless with the drink? And the rifles are still missing.
He has a terminal illness. Question, will he disinherit his wife because of her fling with Gifford?
Who else has he got?
Nobody. Suppose he put Gifford out of the way. Wouldn't get much of a sentence. Might not even live to go through the trial.
But have a look at this.
Lewis had found blood on the floor.
Later.
Morse tapped Lewis on the shoulder
and indicated that he should follow him behind the door. They stood in the shadows. Then Rosemary Henderson came in and went straight to the desk, where she began to look for something. Morse pushed the door shut.
Good evening, Mrs. Henderson.
Oh, my God, Inspector. What's happened?
I don't know. What might have happened?
Well, I've been ringing George ever since Sergeant Lewis was with me. The more I thought about it, I feel sure he's in a bad way. I've been getting the answering machine all afternoon.
Could he be out with his foxes?
Take a look at his log.
Rosemary picked up the log and leafed through it, as Morse, behind her, wandered over to the desk.
No, the entries have tailed off. Look, I've got a feeling that...
Yes, tell me about your feeling in a moment, will you? Sergeant Lewis is just leaving. We expect to be winding up the Gifford case very soon. Thanks, Lewis.
All right, sir. I'll see you later.
Excuse me.
Morse followed Lewis outside. Rosemary watched through the window as they talked, but couldn't hear what they said. She walked over to the desk, then away again, as Morse came back into the cabin.
You had no trouble with the barrier, Mrs. Henderson.
What? Oh, no, George showed me ages ago. There's a button you can press. Oh, I wish I knew where he'd got to. He's very unstable.
Because of the drinking or this illness you mentioned?
Oh, he's ill because he drinks. It's all self-inflicted. He's had warnings.
Well, drink, it fills some kind of need.
I have needs, too. Needs which George can't meet.
In the woods outside, Lewis reversed Morse's car behind some thick bushes and parked out of sight.
Well, if there's nothing else, Inspector, I'd like to get home before it gets dark. It's bad enough being in the house alone.
I needn't detain you any longer.
Can I give you a lift somewhere?
Thank you. I'll just hang on here for a while.
And you'll let me know if there's anything about George.
Of course. I can't officially organize a search till the morning.
Oh, look, his wallet. It's typical. The door's open. Anybody could come in. I'd better... Oh, and his car keys. I don't want him driving. Good night.
Good night.
Rosemary picked up the wallet and keys and left. As she drove away from the cabin, Lewis pulled out from the bushes and followed her. After a couple of miles on a straight, empty stretch of road, Rosemary noticed the red Jaguar in her rear-view mirror. She pulled up by a phone box and went to make a call. Lewis drove on past. A short time later, she stood outside Summertown Library, waiting nervously. She sat down outside and casually slipped her arm over the back of the bench. There was the chink of keys dropping to the ground. Then, equally casually, she got up and went back to her car. As she drove off, Lewis pulled out from behind a parked car further down the road. This time, she didn't notice him. In Whiteham Woods, Morse walked away from the cabin. Only yards from him, unseen among the trees, George Henderson lay in a pool of blood, with the missing shotgun beside him. Outside the library, Somebody reached behind the bench, groped around, and picked up the keys. The morning after, having been reunited with his car, Morse drove into the Westgate car park and collected a ticket at the barrier.
Search of Whitewoods terminated at 9:45 a.m., sir. Nothing further discovered. Body thought to be that of George Henderson, age around 48, forestry ward. Preliminary path report says cause of death, query, suicide.
Query?
Dr. Russell doesn't wish to commit herself at this stage, sir.
And who can blame her?
Sir?
Let me know any other developments. I'm at the Westgate.
Morse drove up to the 5th level, where Lewis was already waiting by his car.
Morning, Lewis.
I blew it again, didn't I, sir?
Oh, I shouldn't think you did anything of the kind. Have you got the ticket?
I waited an hour for it to come back out of her house last night, before it struck me that she wasn't going to. Whatever she... Well, I reckon it must have been the phone call, or something at the library.
The ticket, Lewis.
Oh, yeah.
What time does it say?
9:30, sir.
Mine says 9:55. Now, get back in the car. Put the ticket on the dashboard. Now, suppose I wanted to strangle you, Lewis.
Morse got in the back of the car behind Lewis and put his hands around his neck.
Yeah.
Lewis obediently keeled over.
Now, I removed the car park ticket and the keys, locked the doors, and disappeared. Now, I could give the ticket and the keys to someone else.
Someone else?
Who could come here to the Westgate, get a ticket with a later time stamp, like mine, put it in your car, and then leave, paying the fee on the earlier parking ticket. And poor old PC Plod would think you'd been murdered after 9:55.
So, Gifford was dead by maybe 7:45, not still alive at 12 minutes past, like we thought.
That's right. Just think of all those careful alibis. The woman that rang Gifford in the afternoon to tell him to come early. Come on.
It was a cold, cloudy morning as Morse's car drew up at a local rowing club where Edward Manley was taking part in a regatta. Morse parked beside a blue Jaguar, the same type of car that had been in Whiteham Woods the day before.
Snaps there. Morning, Mrs. Morris.
Sergeant Lewis.
This will be your daughter, is it?
Oh, yes, this
Hello.
is Lisa.
This is Chief Inspector Morse.
Turning out for the farm, eh?
You know, it's a little excursion for us, supporting the Cotswold team. Edward works ever so hard with them. Is there... there's no trouble?
Edward, yes.
Molly.
Remember the jogger in Whiteham Woods last night?
We do a few sandwiches, Lisa and me. Dole them out on race days. Are you on duty?
Many supporters from the office here?
A few?
Not Mrs. Henderson, of course.
Hardly. She's daggers drawn with Edward.
Yes, he said.
Manley was with his team when he noticed the police officers.
Yes. Excuse me, I just got to see something. Oh, what's this, Inspector?
few more inquiries, sir.
Oh, don't like the sound of sir. Policemen get polite, you know there's trouble.
The fact is, Mr. Manley, we're having to revise our estimate of when Michael Gifford was murdered.
Oh.
Everything goes back half an hour. To the vague part of your timetable, the part before the opera with Mrs. Morris and her daughter.
6:25-ish. I was leaving my house then to drive to the theatre.
Anyone see you?
Oh, no. I nipped out for a loaf of bread at some point.
Yes, 4:45 it says in your statement. But that gives us 2 hours in which anything could have happened.
In her bedroom, Rosemary Henderson was carefully checking her appearance. She wore a dark suit and had her hair twisted into an immaculate knot. As she went downstairs, she saw a police car pull up outside.
She's a beautiful woman, isn't she?
Rosemary? I've seen her in too many unbeautiful situations, I'm afraid.
Gifford thought so. Wanted to possess her. Her husband couldn't bear to let her go.
Coffee, Inspector.
Shortly. Henderson's is the alibi that's really, well, nowhere, which is why we have to be absolutely certain about everyone else's.
Yeah, sure, I understand.
So I'd like to know what the hell you were doing in Whiteham Woods last night.
Sorry?
You were identified by 2 independent witnesses. Navy tracksuit with a hood, green stripe, running, weren't you, sir?
At her house, Rosemary followed the 2 uniformed officers to the car and got in the back.
No, sorry. I was at the rugby club last night, coughing till all hours with the lads.
From what time?
Saw the game in the afternoon, stayed on.
Nice car, Mr. Manley.
Yes. Not as nice as yours, though.
Got the keys?
Of course, I drove here this morning.
Show me.
Amy, keys, please.
Spares? You got a spare set?
Doesn't everyone?
Let's go to your house and get them.
No need. I have them here, as a matter of fact.
Melting moments, anyone? Homemade?
Manley felt around in a jacket on the back seat and pulled out the spare keys.
Try them.
Manley put the spare key in the lock, but to his surprise, it wouldn't turn.
Don't understand.
Try my car, sir.
What?
Over here.
Last call for coffee. Anyone else? There's a little left.
Manley put the key in the door of Morse's car, and it opened immediately. He stared at it in disbelief, swallowing hard. He couldn't look Morse in the eye.
Come on, quick. Say what you've got to say.
Last night, in the heat of the moment, you left your keys in George Henderson's office. You found out when you jogged back to your car, but you'd seen us arriving, so you jogged straight on home. Or rather, you stopped and rang your accomplice on the way.
Accomplice?
Who came and retrieved them.
The officers led Rosemary into the police station.
You, he killed himself. They won't make me identify him, will they?
I'm a sucker for a hard luck story. They'll tell you. Henderson phoned me. He said he thought he knew Rosemary was involved in Gifford's murder, and would I talk to her about it? It sounded crazy. Well, I was going on a practice run, so I could just as easily take the Whitehall Woods Road as any other. So I said I'd meet him at his office. Well, nothing. He was raving. I left immediately. Look, you want a murderer, you've no need to look further than George.
Who's dead, by the way. Suicide, apparently. Well, it may not have been suicide. Might have been that someone had a fight with him in the office. Drew a bit of blood, dragged him into the woods, and blew half his face away.
No. I didn't. Look, anyone will tell you I'm not like that. It was an accident. I had a set to in his office, sure. I brought him down. It wasn't difficult, his condition. But he must have got second wind or something, because I'd left and he came roaring after me, and we had another, and grappling, and a bloody gun went off.
Mrs. Henderson took my spare keys instead of yours. I switched them while she was checking her husband's log. You picked them up later at the Summertown Public Library. Thank you, Mr. Manley.
Morse held out his hand for his keys.
Mrs. Henderson and Manley, eh?
Overacting, the animosity between them. Perfect alibi.
Well, all the time, though. I don't know. Passion makes a right old mess, doesn't it?
In the police station, the two officers led Rosemary Henderson to the hallway as Manley was brought in, handcuffed. And they came face to face.
They brought you in too, did they? It's all over, isn't it, love? We got it wrong. You got it wrong in Interlaken with Gifford. But I want you to know it was still the best thing that ever happened to me. The best thing.
You do realize, Inspector, don't you, that this man has made my life a misery. He's had his knife into me. The staff at the office will bear me out. There's no secret.
I'll be talking to you, Mrs. Henderson, when I'm ready.
That night, Dr. Russell came to Morse's house for a drink before going to the opera.
Got no time for this sort of music, have you, Morse?
I've got more time for Von.
Didn't write many quick steps, as I recall. You owe me a dance. Oh, I can dance to anything.
Really? Should try dancing to the back end of Lohengrin sometime.
No. Let's have something from Parsifal, since we're going to a performance.
Look, no, we're not. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Dr. Russell held up a pair of tickets.
Where did you get those?
I wish I could say from a grateful patient, like any decent healer.
Oh,
By phoning the box office night and day to ask about return. By diverting my technician from a highly complex analysis of stomach contents to going to collect them. By then I...
You're amazing. You shall have your wish.
Morse picked up the sleeve of Parsifal and shook out the record. 2 ticket-sized pieces of paper slipped out at the same time.
I don't believe this.
Why, what have you found?
My lost tickets.